Today, we are going to the mid-19th century, so sit back as we go to Scotland. Edward William Pritchard was born in 1825 in the English seaside town of Southsea. His family had a proud naval history, and his father, John White Pritchard, was a well-known and well-respected naval captain. When young Edward finished his schooling, he claimed to have gone on to study medicine at King's College Hospital in London, where he graduated in 1846. He then served in the Royal Navy as an assistant surgeon with HMS Victory. For the following 4 years he served on various other ships, travelling around the world, before returning to his family home in Southsea. There he met a young Scottish lady named Mary Jane Taylor, who was the daughter of a successful silk merchant from Edinburgh. It was now the year 1850, and Mary Jane was staying in nearby Portsmouth with her uncle named David Cowan, who was a retired naval surgeon. Not long after they met, Edward proposed to Mary Jane, and in 1851 the young couple married. Edward, however, had to go away again, as his naval duties meant that he was needed on his ship. But this was the last time that the couple would spend time apart, as on his return to Portsmouth, he resigned from the Navy. The couple then moved to the north of England, where Edward started working as a doctor on the Yorkshire coast, covering the areas which included Hunmanby, Falkton and Filey. His wife Mary Jane preferred life in Yorkshire, mainly because it was only 220 miles back to Edinburgh, compared to the 450 miles from Portsmouth. But she longed to be back in Scotland, and would often try to persuade her husband that life in Scotland would be better for them. Edward was a confident man. He dressed well, and he liked to be considered an intelligent, hard-working and respectable person. By 1860 his wife had given birth to 5 children, 3 daughters and 2 sons. And as his children were getting older, Edward thought that the city life may be best for his family. He was getting tired of living his rural existence, and the locals and his patients had all heard his many stories of the amazing things he'd achieved while in the Navy, which most people believed to be at best fabricated, and at worst, completely untrue. So in 1860, the family left England and went to live in Scotland. At first they lived with Mary Jane's parents in Edinburgh, before they took up their residence in the city of Glasgow. Once settled in their new home, Edward tried to establish himself into the city's elite social circles, and tried to join the most prestigious medical societies. He again told his wonderful tales of life in the Navy, and boasted that his brother was the Governor-General of Ceylon, and that he was a personal friend of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was very well known at the time throughout Europe due to his role in the unification of Italy. The Pritchard family lived in Glasgow's Sauchiehall Streets, which in the 1860s was one of the best areas of the city, and in 1863 they moved to a fine residence at 11 Berkeley Terrace, which included an attic room for their maid. Their maid was a pretty 25-year-old named Elizabeth McCraig, but tragically, on the 6th of May in the same year, a fire was seen coming from the attic of the house. Mary Jane and the children were away at the time. A policeman raised the alarm, and when Edward awoke, he frantically ran upstairs to save his maid, but the fire was too intense, and he quickly retreated. Eventually the firefighters got the fire under control, but when they entered the attic, they found the burned body of Elizabeth. She was lying on her bed and had made no attempt to escape the fire. An investigation followed, and it was concluded that the cause of the fire was a gas jet igniting. As Elizabeth was reading in her bed, she had probably fallen asleep with the lamp still on. Despite the cause of the incident being confirmed, it did not stop the local gossip, and soon it seemed that everyone was talking about Dr. Edward Pritchard. Why did the young maid not try to escape? Some speculated that she had been killed beforehand. Edward was 38 years old, and everyone knew that he considered himself to be a ladies' man. Rumours circulated that the doctor and Elizabeth were in a relationship, and that she had become pregnant. He then killed her and caused the fire in an attempt to cover up his actions. The police were not interested in rumours and found no evidence against the doctor. The case was closed. The family, however, could not continue to live in the house, so had to move home again and went to another elegant street, arriving at 22 Royal Crescent. They employed another very pretty maid named Mary MacLeod. She was 15 years old and from the Scottish island of Islay. She had come to Glasgow to find work and was pleased to be able to live in such an elegant residence and work for a doctor and his wife. Despite the rumours that had surfaced about Edward, he was a confident man and didn't let any local gossip affect his daily routines. He did possess a rather strange habit. He would walk along the street and hand out postcards of himself to anyone who he considered worthy of having one. No one was entirely sure why he did this, but it was certainly good entertainment for the locals, who considered his ways somewhat peculiar. Soon the 38-year-old doctor started to flirt with his 15-year-old maid. Edward's finances were not in a very good state, and he had not been accepted into Glasgow's elite medical circles, and his qualifications were considered questionable by some. However, he purchased a house, and the family moved back to the fashionable Sauchiehall Street. He could not really afford the house, but fortunately his mother-in-law helped out by contributing £500 towards it. Now again living in one of the best streets in the city, Edward continued to stroll around the city in his flamboyant manner. In November 1864, Mary Jane started to feel unwell. She had stomach pains and was vomiting. In order to recuperate, she went back to Edinburgh to be nursed by her mother, and after a few weeks she felt better, so returned home for Christmas and the New Year. However, back in Glasgow, her health again started to deteriorate. Edward told his wife that she had gastric fever, but her condition did not improve, so Edward asked another doctor for his opinion, and he diagnosed a stomach irritation. Mary Jane, however, continued to feel unwell and asked to get the opinion of another doctor. This time she was diagnosed with suffering from anxiety and was told she would need rest, and it seemed that no one was able to find out why Mary Jane Pritchard was finding it so difficult to get well. Her mother, Mrs. Jane Taylor, decided to come to Glasgow to nurse her daughter. Mrs. Taylor was 70 years old and was on medication, but as her daughter's health worsened, Mrs. Taylor also started to feel ill. On February the 25th, Edward asked a doctor named Dr. James Patterson for his opinion, but a few hours after the visit, Mrs. Taylor died. Edward signed her death certificate, stating the cause of death as paralysis and apoplexy. In her will, she left 2/3 of her £2,500 estate to Edward's wife, Mary Jane, and the rest to her son. Mary Jane didn't improve, and on the 17th of March, Edward called Dr. Patterson. She was now in a very bad way, and Dr. Patterson was concerned that her condition had worsened so quickly. 2 days later, on March the 19th, 1865, Mary Jane Pritchard died. Her husband, Dr. Edward Pritchard, certified the cause of death as gastric fever. Edward then accompanied his wife's body to Edinburgh, where she was buried in a grave adjacent to her mother at the Grange Cemetery. He was very emotional at the funeral. Friends and family of Mary Jane noticed that Edward cried throughout the service. After the service, Dr. Edward Pritchard returned to Glasgow, but was shocked to be met by 2 police officers, and he was arrested. Apparently the Procurator Fiscal had received an anonymous letter which outlined concerns connecting the death of Mary Jane Pritchard and her mother, Mrs. Jane Taylor. An exhumation of the 2 deceased women was ordered, and the subsequent post-mortem uncovered a large amount of antimony in both bodies. The subsequent police investigation also uncovered that Edward had bought large amounts of various poisons in the months preceding their deaths. The police thought that they had a good case against him, and he was charged with murder. The trial started on Monday the 3rd of July, 1865, and the evidence against the doctor looked solid. The prosecution called the family maid Mary MacLeod, who said that she had been having a relationship with the accused, and she informed the court that he had told her that if anything happened to his wife, he would marry her. The papers were fascinated with the case, and the sensational story soon became the talk of shops and pubs throughout Scotland. The defence called Edward's 14-year-old daughter to give evidence, and as she did, Edward became very emotional. His eyes welled up, and tears started to stream down his face. The press reported these to be crocodile tears, and he was dubbed the human crocodile. The trial lasted for 5 days, and when the jury was sent out, it took them just 1 hour to reach their verdict. And with a full court and a packed press gallery, the jury returned to find the defendant, Dr. Edward William Pritchard, guilty of the murder of his mother-in-law and his wife. The judge sentenced him to death. From prison, Edward blamed the poisoning on the young maid Mary MacLeod, but during his days waiting for his execution, he eventually confessed to a priest. He retracted his statement implying that the young maid had committed the crime and admitted his guilt. He said, "The sentence is just. I am guilty of the deaths of my mother-in-law and my wife. I can assign no motive beyond terrible madness." He did, however, deny that he had anything to do with the 1863 fire, which resulted in the death of Elizabeth McCraig. On July the 28th, 1865, Edward Pritchard was taken to the gallows. A large crowd gathered to watch him hang, and at 8:10 in the morning, Edward William Pritchard became the last person to be publicly executed in Scotland. Hello everyone, and thank you very much for listening. As per usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next brief case